Good morning, viewers. Welcome to this law lecture series. Today's topic is writ jurisdiction under the Constitution of India, Part 2nd in English. Very soon, you will have Hindi version of this lecture also. In the last lecture, we had discussed a brief evolutionary course of high prerogative writs. First lecture. Now, today, we will start with this writ, extraordinary and discretionary remedy. This is very basic concept about writs. It is an extraordinary remedy, not a routine remedy, not an ordinary remedy. And secondly, at the same time, writ jurisdiction is a discretionary jurisdiction. 2 points very important: extraordinary jurisdiction and discretionary jurisdiction. It has been divided here in 3 subparts. See here, subpart A, subpart B, and the subpart C. Now, a detailed discussions about these 3 subparts. Subpart A, writ and extraordinary remedy. If the petitioner has an equally efficacious alternative remedy, equally efficacious alternative remedy. Efficacious means effective, fruitful. So if the petitioner has an equally efficacious alternative remedy, the writ court will not interfere. It is a very serious thing. Preliminary objection will be raised by the opposite party that he has an equally efficacious alternative remedy available, yet he is here invoking the writ jurisdiction. No one can invoke writ jurisdiction if he has an alternative remedy that is equally efficacious. Person may be injured, he may have a legal grievance, but the writ court will not interfere on the ground that you have an equally efficacious alternative remedy available to you. Go there. Alternative remedy is not an absolute bar. It is a bar, but not an absolute bar. So even if there is alternative remedy available to the petitioner, the writ court may interfere on some exceptional grounds. Alternative remedy is a bar, but it is not an absolute bar. In exceptional cases, writ court may still interfere, ignoring the fact that the petitioner has an alternative remedy. It is an important aspect of writ jurisdiction. Alternative remedy is a matter of policy, a matter of discretion, a matter of practicability. It's not a rule of law. It does not take away court's jurisdiction. Alternative remedy is a matter of policy, a matter of discretion, a matter of practicability. It is not a rule of law. It does not bar court's jurisdiction. So in exceptional cases, the court may interfere, notwithstanding that the petitioner has an alternative remedy available to him. Now, what are those exceptional cases or circumstances? See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 exceptional grounds. Court may interfere even though the petitioner has an alternative remedy available to him. These 5 grounds of exception you must prepare thoroughly. Let us see it. First exception is violation of fundamental rights. Where the petitioner's fundamental rights are infringed, writ court is duty bound to afford him appropriate remedy. It can't say that you have an alternative remedy, go there. It's a question of violation of fundamental right. Alternative remedy is no bar. Court is duty bound to interfere. This is the most serious injury that a person can suffer. There is violation of fundamental right. Second, violation of principles of natural justice. Without affording hearing, the order has been passed. Action has been taken. So where there is a breach of or violation of principles of natural justice, again here, the writ court will interfere. Alternative remedy will not come into the way. Now, third exception. Alternative remedy not equally efficacious. Petitioner does have an alternative remedy, but the alternative remedy is not equally efficacious, not equally fruitful or effective. Oh, alternative remedy is there, but it is not equally efficacious. In such a case also, the writ court is to interfere. Exception number 3. Now let us see the fourth exception. The order has been passed, action has been taken in lack of jurisdiction. Order has been passed, action has been taken in lack of jurisdiction. This is very serious matter. If the authority has no jurisdiction, yet it has proceeded and it has passed an order, it has taken an action, here writ court will interfere, notwithstanding that the petitioner may have an alternative remedy. Fifth exception. The statute under which the petitioner has a remedy itself is unconstitutional. The statute under which the petitioner has an alternative remedy itself is unconstitutional or ultra vires. In such a case also, the writ court will interfere. So these are 5 exceptions to the alternative remedy. Alternative remedy is a bar, but it is not an absolute bar. So in these exceptional cases, the court will interfere and afford appropriate remedy to the petitioner. Now, subhead B. Writ a discretionary remedy. A part, writ an extraordinary remedy that we have covered. Now, B part, writ is a discretionary remedy. Let us discuss this discretionary remedy. Where there is a violation of fundamental right, violation of principles of natural justice, where the statute affording remedy is unconstitutional, in all such cases, the court is duty bound to interfere. It is left with no discretion. But in other cases of injuries, court has discretion. In an appropriate case, it may interfere. In other cases, it may say no. Not a fit case for exercise of discretion. Here it is discretion. Court is not duty bound. Here the court is duty bound. Here the court is not duty bound. Here the petitioner has a right to remedy. Here the petitioner has no such right. It's a matter of discretion. Court may say that this is not a fit case for exercise of discretion. It may refuse to interfere. What may be the possible grounds of refusal? What may be the possible grounds of refusal? Let us see. First, availability of equally efficacious alternative remedy. You have, Mr. Petitioner, you have an equally efficacious alternative remedy. So this writ court will not interfere. Refused. Second, the petitioner is guilty of serious procedural lapse. Procedural lapse. There is no signature on the writ petition. There is not proper verification of the facts stated in the writ petition. Court fees has not been paid or insufficiently paid. These are all procedural lapse. So first ground of refusal is availability of equally efficacious alternative remedy. Second ground of refusal is serious procedural lapse on the part of the petitioner. And the third ground of refusal is very important. It is a discretionary remedy, so conduct is very important. Conduct is very important. If the petitioner is found guilty of improper conduct, the writ court may outright refuse to entertain the matter. Your conduct is not up to the mark. You don't deserve the sympathy of this court. Get away from here. Improper conduct includes first, concealment of material facts. Concealment of material facts. Second head of improper conduct is petitioner has an ulterior motive. He has not come to seek justice. He has come with some ulterior motive. He has not come with clean hands. He is guilty of abuse of legal procedure. Take it seriously and note it well. Improper conduct. First, concealment of material facts from the court. He is not honest. concealment of material facts from the court. Second, he has some ulterior motive. He is not a fair person. He has not come with clean hands. He is guilty of abuse of legal procedure. These are all examples of improper conduct. Grounds of refusal. First, availability of equally efficacious alternative remedy to the petitioner. Second, petitioner guilty of serious procedural lapse. Third, petitioner guilty of improper conduct. And fourth, delay or laches. Petitioner has suffered an injury, but he was dormant. He has approached the court very late. Delay or laches. Laches means inordinate delay, excessive delay. So if the petitioner has come to the court after a prolonged delay and the delay has not been explained or not sufficiently explained, that's a valid ground to refuse any relief to such petitioner. See this maxim. Vigilantibus et non dormientibus jura subveniunt. What does it mean? Note it and listen properly. Court helps those who are vigilant about their rights and not those who are dormant about their rights. If you are sleeping over your right, if you are not vigilant about your grievances, about your rights, you don't deserve any judicial indulgence. So delay or laches may also be a ground for refusal. Sometimes a question is asked, is there any time period? There is any period of limitation within which the petitioner must approach the writ court for appropriate relief? Whether the Indian Limitation Act 1963 applies to the writ jurisdiction? The Indian Limitation Act 1963. Does it apply to the writ jurisdiction? Here is an important leading case. Trilok Chand, note it. Trilok Chand, Moti Chand versus H.B. Munshi, 1970 Supreme Court. Direct question before the Supreme Court was whether the Indian Limitation Act 1963 applies to writ jurisdiction. The court answered in negative, no. Theoretically, the Indian Limitation Act 1963 is inapplicable to the writ jurisdiction. But the basic principles underlying this act may be resorted to in the administration of justice. Whether Indian Limitation Act 1963 applies to writ jurisdiction? Answer is theoretically no. But in the administration of justice, the general principles of this act may be applied by the courts. Now, subpart C. who may apply and against whom. Who can file a writ petition and against whom such a petition may be filed. Answer is very simple. A person aggrieved, a person having cause of action may approach the court. He has locus standi. Locus standi means right to appear before the court, right to seek remedy from the court. So if you are a person aggrieved, if you have a cause of action, you have locus standi. You may file a writ petition and seek relief. This is called doctrine of locus standi. The doctrine of locus standi is a technical doctrine, narrow doctrine. Its rigidity or its strictness has been mitigated, has been relaxed. Person aggrieved is a poor man, he is an illiterate person, he is not aware of his rights. In that case, you go on his behalf. I will go on his behalf and seek justice. This is better approach. So the rigidity of doctrine of locus standi has been considerably relaxed. I am not saying that the doctrine of locus standi has been done away with. It is not done away with. But in important cases, rare cases, a person who is not himself aggrieved, who himself does not have cause of action, may approach the court and seek justice on behalf of others. Persons who are poor, persons who are deprived, persons who are illiterate, persons who are ignorant about their rights. I may go for them, you may go for them. After all, everybody has the right to justice. Any public spirited person, look here, very serious point. Any public spirited person having sufficient interest may go to the court on behalf of others. Public spirited person having sufficient interest may approach the court on behalf of those persons who by themselves are not capable of knocking the doer of the court. This is liberal view, modern view. This is called public interest litigation. Public interest litigation is a very good concept. Justice P. N. Bhagwati of the Supreme Court, Justice P. N. Bhagwati of the Supreme Court was an activist judge. He has a great contribution in the development of law as to public interest litigation. One thing is very important. The concept of public interest litigation is very good, but it is abused. It is misused by those who are vested interest, who try to derive political benefit, who want to coerce the authorities. Such persons file public interest litigation without any just cause. They have some ulterior motive behind that. They have made public interest litigation a private interest litigation. This should be checked. public interest litigation cannot be allowed to be made private interest litigation. So these days, courts are very strict. A screening is made, whether it is a fit case for being entertained as public interest litigation. And if the court is not satisfied, it will outright reject the public interest litigation. Compensatory costs, heavy costs, may also be imposed upon the person who has filed public interest litigation for some ulterior motives. He can't be allowed to abuse such mechanism. Now the last point. Against whom the writ petition may be filed? Very simple. The state. The state, as defined in Article 12 of the Constitution. The state. Writ can be filed against the state action. Writ cannot be filed against private individual. Exception is there. Writ of habeas corpus. Writ of habeas corpus. Suppose I am detained by somebody illegally. Government official or private individual. He has detained me illegally. Now, for my release, you may file a habeas corpus petition against that person, private individual. So the habeas corpus petition is the only exception. Any private individual may be made respondent and the writ of habeas corpus may be issued against that private individual. But as a general rule, writs are not issued to a private individual. This is all for today. Thank you very much.